Be sure to check out Rob Plays. There you can hang out with me while I play video games and talk to you about random life stuff. So what I want to do here is have a discussion about the four horsemen of apocalypse. And what I'm hoping is that at the end of all this, you'll have a strong understanding of the team, as well as how they fit into the overall pantheon of Marvel Comics. So the four horsemen of apocalypse first appeared in X Factor issue number 15 in 1987 and were created by Louise Simonson. And while this is the first chronological appearance of the group, I want to jump out of chronology and travel back to the early days of Apocalypse and the Dark Riders. In my video on Apocalypse Explained, we had talked about how he had risen to influence following the manifestation of his powers, which included super strength, speed, durability, and immortality. While his initial action was to run off Kang the Conqueror, a time traveler who had been masquerading as a pharaoh in Egypt in order to acquire Apocalypse in the early days of his life and use them to conquer the world. Following this origin, Apocalypse began traveling the world, pitting various societies against one another in an effort to eliminate the weak and ensure the survival of the strong. During this time, Apocalypse had laid the foundation for future societies in that, much like the Romans who would come thousands of years later, Apocalypse made soldiers out of the conquered society's strongest members. Referring to themselves as the Riders of the Dark, the army swept across the world like a plague, conquering territory after territory, all in the name of Apocalypse, who would use the terror of their existence as a means to inspire fear among the weak. In addition to this, in the four-part series Apocalypse vs. Dracula, written by Frank Thierry and released in 2006, Apocalypse and his Riders of the Dark had encountered Vlad the Impaler, whose historical influence on the world under the moniker of Dracula was brought to an end when the Riders of the Dark had killed him. Now, while this bit of history also contradicts existing information like 1982's Bizarre Adventures number 33, which depicted Vlad being killed due to false visions which led him into a battle that he couldn't win, what we do know is that because the time traveler Cable had sought to destroy Apocalypse before he could merge with celestial technology, during their first encounter, Cable had laid waste to the entirety of the Riders of the Dark, after which he defeated Apocalypse, leaving him for dead. Now, while Apocalypse himself would survive and use Cable's blood as a means to communicate with the celestial ship and take on the various powers that he possesses today, following this transformation, he had begun his conquest anew, but with the idea of using the celestial ship to modify the genetic structure of those he considered worthy, transforming them into agents of his own will. While this time period did not actually see him reforming the Riders of the Dark or taking on another team of his own, it did see him encountering individuals like Nathaniel Essex and Bennett Duperrey, transmogrifying both men into Mr. Sinister and Exodus respectively, while either giving them powers as was the case with Essex, or enhancing their powers as was the case in Exodus. Regardless, since Apocalypse is required to re-energize himself every few thousand years in order to ensure his powers operate at peak function, we can largely assume that at some point between his encounter with Exodus and his first appearance in X Factor issue number 5, he had left the Marvel landscape for this purpose, but re-emerged in an effort to begin another conquest at world domination. Taking place in X Factor issue number 10, with Apocalypse recognizing the surge in mutant and superhuman development as well as the various powers that came with him, unlike the days of old when fear was enough to seize control of a country, the world had grown accustomed to seeing individuals like the Avengers, Spider-Man, and others, all of whom, while not strong enough to challenge Apocalypse on their own, could easily topple his reign if working together. As an example, in 2013, as part of his run on Uncanny Avengers, writer Rick Remender had offered a backstory which featured Apocalypse and Thor doing battle, which ended with Apocalypse's near death after Thor attacked him with a magically imbued axe known as Yarnbjorn. Looking to ensure his success in taking over the world, with X Factor issue number 10 going through issues number 26, Louise Simonson tied the series into existing Marvel crossovers, but featuring Apocalypse as a background character, mustering a group of beings who would serve as his agents and represent the four horsemen of biblical scripture. Taking place in the Mutant Massacre, an event crossing over within the pages of X Factor, X-Men, Daredevil, Thor, New Mutants, and Power Pack, while the main story focused on Mr. Sinister viewing the Morlocks within the tunnels of New York as failed experiments and instructing Gambit and his marauders to eliminate them, during this time, Apocalypse approached a woman named Plague who had the power to enhance and spread disease. Looking to take her on as the Horseman Pestilence, because the Morlocks exist as cast-offs due to their physical deformities or extreme powers, which made them targets for fear and hatred among humanity, Apocalypse offered Plague a place at his side which continued the trend of his ability to prey on the weak-minded, but also used Plague's desire to find a place for herself within society following the deaths of so many of her friends. Accepting his offer and traveling to the celestial ship, Apocalypse's next appearance came with the introduction of a man named Abraham Kiros. As a mutant with the ability to create explosive blasts by clapping his hands, With Abraham having been paralyzed from the neck down during the Vietnam War, he was offered the ability to walk if he agreed to serve as Apocalypse's Horseman War. Accepting this offer, Abraham was transported to the celestial ship, after which Apocalypse turned his sights to a young girl named Autumn Rolfson. Because Autumn had the power to disintegrate organic material on contact, while her lack of mastery over the power she possessed hadn't cost the lives of anyone around her, the fact that she could lose control and kill someone inspired fear among her parents and children at school. In addition to this, because Project Wide Awake had already been launched as a joint venture between the National Security Council, the FBI, and the NSA, with Henry Peter Gyrick overseeing the operations and using Sentinels to round up mutants, the fear of Autumn's parents also gave way to concern over not just the lives of those around them, but the life of Autumn herself. To this end, Autumn was routinely kept hidden away from the world and only allowed to leave her home when traveling to school. As a result, Autumn's hatred for her parents and society at large turned inward, leaving her in an emaciated state. Using this to his advantage, Apocalypse had approached Autumn, offering her the power to seek revenge on her parents, but also master her own abilities and experience a free and fruitful life. Accepting Apocalypse's offer, Autumn was taken away to the celestial ship where she, alongside Plague and Abraham, found their powers augmented, but were also brainwashed, soaring fealty to Apocalypse and his cause of survival of the fittest. Now where these three had operated as the first horsemen, with Apocalypse looking to fulfill biblical prophecy, live up to his namesake, and inspire fear throughout the world, he sought out a fourth horseman to take the role of Death, eventually setting his sights on Warren Worthington. Taking place in the final pages of X Factor issues 16, 17, and 18, with Warren having used his vast wealth to fund the actions of X Factor and their efforts alongside the X-Men, in order to ensure the illusion was maintained of X Factor taking mutants as prisoners of the federal government, Warren Worthington brought his former college roommate Cameron Hodge on board as the team's public relations director to ensure the public never became aware that X Factor was actually handing mutants over to Charles Xavier to ensure their safety and training on the use of their abilities. However, because Cameron had come to view Warren with jealous eyes due to Warren's success both financially and personally, Cameron had begun to engineer a series of plans, all of which would come to fruition with X Factor going bankrupt, disbanding, and Warren Worthington dying. With Warren Worthington being injured during the mutant massacre and that his wings were mauled to the point that amputation was considered a possibility, because Cameron's machinations remained unknown to the team, he had exercised his position as the group's lawyer to seize control of Warren's fortune and have his wings amputated. With Warren coming to and recognizing that he had lost virtually everything, despite Cameron's defeat, his last act came in the form of Warren's jet exploding, leading X Factor to believe that Warren had committed suicide in the face of financial bankruptcy. While Warren had actually been taken away by Apocalypse in the moments before the jet's explosion, Apocalypse offered a deal. If Warren would serve as his horseman Death, Apocalypse would give him back his ability to fly. Accepting the offer without question, much like Plague, Autumn, and Abraham, Warren got more than he bargained for, and that he was brainwashed and came to view Apocalypse as the harbinger of the end times, culling the weak from the world. Following this, the various themes assembled by Louis Simonson came to a head in issue number 23, with the four horsemen doing battle against X Factor. Now because Warren possessed full knowledge of the X Factor team, having been a full-fledged member of the original X-Men and experiencing their strengths and weaknesses firsthand, this information came to use as he was able to rally the other three horsemen to strike X Factor in key positions, overcoming their extensive training and pushing the team to near defeat. However, with the Mutant Massacre event still seeing fallout, X Factor was joined by Power Pack, a group of child heroes who were led by Franklin Richards and used their abilities to assist X Factor in overcoming the four horsemen, during which time Pestilence was killed and Warren's mind was returned to normal, albeit tormented by his experience battling his friends. Now while this would go on to serve as the basis for the future of Warren's character and his eternal hatred for Apocalypse, with the four horsemen having been defeated, Apocalypse retreated for the purpose of regathering his forces and attempting domination once again. Covered in X Factor Volume 1, Issues 66 and 67 as part of the lead-up to Cable's origin, what we're told is that at some point following his defeat, Apocalypse had traveled to the oxygenated blue area of the moon and invaded Attilan, seizing control of a portion of the Inhuman populace and taking 6 of their most powerful beings outside of the royal family. Reforming the Riders of the Dark, it was revealed that Apocalypse's vast powers had the side effect of burning through his body, requiring him to use a new host to keep his essence alive. Coming to the conclusion that the offspring of Jean Grey's clone Madeline Pryor was the ideal candidate due to his Omega-level telepathy and telekinesis, Apocalypse had ordered the Riders of the Dark to kidnap the child, leading to a battle between Apocalypse and a full contingent of the X-Men, X-Force, X-Factor, and the Inhumans. While the story would see Apocalypse driven off and Nathan Summers taken to the future to become Cable, The events also saw the Riders of the Dark completely destroyed, leaving Apocalypse to recover from his injuries and reform a team for the third time. Now, following this particular battle, as far as I'm aware, Apocalypse never fully reformed the Four Horsemen for a number of years. While there's no definitive answer to this, I would wager that with the launch of X-Men Volume 2 in 1991 under Chris Claremont and Jim Lee, the original X-Factor team was rolled over into the new X-Men title with greater emphasis on fighting villains like Magneto and creating new content and stories like the introduction of Avalon as an asteroid ran by Magneto and serving as a safe haven for mutants, as well as Fatal Attractions, which introduced the Acolytes, who were similar to the Horsemen but were led by Fabian Cortez and served Magneto. In addition to this, with the launch of Age of Apocalypse as a 6-month-long series replacing all existing X-Men related titles, on the whole, Marvel was looking to move away from Apocalypse as a central villain and instead move him to the role of a background character in various stories. As a result, for around 5 years between 1991 and 1996, Apocalypse had no Horsemen of his own. Instead, his stories were isolated to focusing on singular beings like Strife, the future clone of Cable, as well as stepping in to defeat Onslaught at the behest of the Watcher. However, because Fatal Attractions had left Wolverine without his adamantium and sent Volume 2 of his solo series plunging in terms of sales, under writer Larry Hama, the decision was made to restore Wolverine to the status quo, as well as set the stage for the crossover story The 12. Taking place in Wolverine Volume 2, issues 99, 100, and 101, with Apocalypse looking to reform the Horsemen, Wolverine was kidnapped and replaced with a Skrull replicate, allowing Apocalypse to pit him against Sabretooth. Informing the two that whoever won the battle would be his new Horseman Death, Wolverine proved himself to be superior, leading to Apocalypse returning his adamantium and brainwashing Logan. Taking the next step and leading into the 12 crossover, because the story focused on the idea that 12 individuals would lead an uprising against humanity, Apocalypse came to believe that he alone was designed to be the harbinger of this prophecy. To this end, he had captured Deathbird, the sister of the Shi'ar Empress Lilandra, Caliban, a former Morlock with the power to track mutants, and Rory Campbell, who had no powers, but was given the ability to drain the life energy of others, all of whom came together as Pestilence, War, and Famine respectively, and alongside Wolverine, began the process of collecting the 12. Now, where this group consisted of Magneto and his daughter Polaris representing the magnetic poles, Iceman, Storm, and Sunfire representing the elements, Cyclops, Jean, and Cable representing the father, the mother, and the son, Bishop and Mikhail Rasputin representing time and space, with Charles Xavier representing pure thought, Apocalypse looked to channel all of their powers through the living monolith, a mutant with the ability to absorb any and all forms of energy, giving Apocalypse the power to remake reality. However, with Cyclops intervening and destroying the process, Apocalypse merged with Scott, forming a kind of hybrid being, with Apocalypse and Scott vying for control of the body. Now, in terms of the Horsemen, because the post-12 continuity removed the traditional role of Apocalypse and had seen Rory Campbell, Caliban, Wolverine, and Deathbird return to normal, the concept of the Horsemen remained virtually unused for the entirety of about 6 years, between 2000 and 2006. The reason why was that with Marvel facing major financial issues and writer Joe Quesada coming on board as editor-in-chief, focus was shifted away from attempting to keep interest in older characters to revitalization and revamping. As a result, this 6-year window saw a series of massive upheavals, including the cancellation of Avengers, the start of New Avengers, the launch of Civil War, and the infamous retcon of Peter Parker's marriage to Mary Jane Watson. And coming out of the House of M, which saw 98% of the mutant population losing their powers, Decimation served to provide a basis for why the X-Men maintained complete lack of involvement in Civil War, and that with the number of active mutants being so low, the X-Men could ill afford to lose anyone. During this time, and after having remained in a rejuvenation chamber, Apocalypse re-emerged, claiming to have been awakened prematurely due to the sudden drop in the mutant populace. Looking to place himself as the messiah of mutant kind, in addition to demanding that humanity cull 98% of its population to match the 98% reduction in the mutant population, he began to reform his Horsemen. Kidnapping Gazer, a mutant with the power to absorb all forms of radiation, Sunfire, who could produce heat similar to Johnny Storm, and Polaris, who was capable of manipulating magnetism in the same fashion as her father Magneto, these three took on the form of War, Famine, and Pestilence, with Gambit approaching Apocalypse for the purpose of becoming Death. Now, in terms of Gambit, while he has been an X-Man and fought against Apocalypse on a multitude of occasions, the argument he made here was that in times of desperation, mutant kind needed a leader who had experience, but was also capable of doing things that no one else would. With Apocalypse having been in existence for thousands of years and routinely attempting to seize control of the world, His stance was that existing mutants of the world had withstood the fires of testing and proved themselves worthy, indicating that Apocalypse would go to any length to ensure their survival against whatever threats they may face. However, the story went on to reveal that this act by Apocalypse served to rally mutants for the purpose of attempting to defeat the Celestials who were fast approaching and bringing their judgment. To sidetrack here, if you recall my video on Apocalypse Explained, we had talked about how he had gained his expansive abilities after striking a bargain with the Celestials, using their technology for future payments of unknown explanation. As a result, the conflict between Apocalypse and his forces saw victory on the side of the X-Men, the New Mutants, and Tony Stark's Office of National Emergency Sentinels, with Apocalypse fatally wounded. Looking to death as a means to escape his punishment, in the moments before his passing, Apocalypse was presumed to be whisked away to perdition by the Celestials, with the comic offering no indication as to whether or not he would ever return. Following this, with Apocalypse having remained vacant from Marvel Comics for around 4 years, in 2010 as part of Rick Remender's run on the newly launched X-Force, Apocalypse was resurrected by his servant Ozymandias, and the history of the Four Horsemen received a bit of a retcon. What we're told is that where previous information held that Apocalypse started forming the Four Horsemen in response to the rise of the mutant population, instead, the Horsemen had been an existing idea, and those formed in the original pages of X-Factor were not the first. With Apocalypse recognizing the possibility of his own death should he fail to stop the judgment of the Celestials, Apocalypse alongside his servant Ozymandias had begun to secretly collect 4 individuals who were deemed worthy beyond those who were normally chosen. To this end, if the death of Apocalypse were to occur, he would be reanimated by Ozymandias, and these 4 horsemen would serve to ensure his survival until such time that Apocalypse garnered enough power to return to his role as a demigod, seeking to rule the world. Now, as a group that existed secretly and without the knowledge of any of Earth's heroes aside from themselves, Wolverine, Psylocke, Deadpool, Phantom X, and Archangel functioned as the Uncanny X-Force and operated more akin to a Black Ops team, eliminating the world's problems before the public became aware of the fact that those problems even existed. As such, with Apocalypse standing as an Omega-level threat, under the leadership of Wolverine, X-Force sought him out for the purpose of discovering how far the resurrection process had progressed and in what condition Apocalypse existed. Taking place in issue number 4 at the conclusion of the first story arc, with the discovery of Apocalypse as a child, the final Horsemen existed to protect this version of Apocalypse by whatever means necessary. Now, while their involvement here is extremely limited and that almost nothing was known about their lives before encountering Apocalypse, and that they were defeated almost immediately by X-Force, the depiction of these final Horsemen was that they hailed from all corners of the world and came in the form of Decimus Furious, who possessed super strength, durability, immunity to psychic powers, and regeneration, Ichisumi from Japan, who would release a swarm of flesh-eating beetles, Jeb Lee, who could produce sounds that would destroy the flesh of those who heard it, and Sanjar Javid, who can infect a single person or group of people with lethal diseases of virtually any nature. With that being said, because of the fact that I have upcoming videos for the Apocalypse Wars, what I want to do here is I'm actually going to go ahead and end this video. And what we'll do is that once we get to Apocalypse Wars, we'll actually wrap back around and we'll talk about that iteration of the Four Horsemen, most of whom actually consist of members of the X-Men themselves. With that being said, we're going to bring this video to an end, and I will catch you guys later. Peace.